Ladies and gentlemen, we are back with Season 1, Episode 3, Smooth Criminal. This is the first gig episode. This is their first little adventure module. Like, I don't know. This is your tutorial, right? If I was actually running a Cyberpunk campaign, which I've done many times, this would be the kind of thing I'd do to new players to introduce them to how the system works and how to operate with each other and get the team introduced to each other and stuff like that. Literally, this is the prologue, right? Cool. No complaints here. The video game parallels continue. This is an interesting setup. So we find out, and I actually didn't call this, I'll be freely honest. These people actually worked with their mother. That's why they think this hardware belongs to them, is because it kind of does. They paid for it to her, which is the money he's already spent to pay off the medical bills for the fact that she's dead. Cool. Sendevistan, by the way, as in devastate. Got it. Interesting world building here, because as they talk and as they lay things out, and the kid is obviously very punky the entire time, of course he is. The overwhelming message is the entire world sucks, well, the city sucks, and people suck, so everything sucks. Principal calls to offer the bait. Okay, cool. Yeah, it all sucks. That's Cyberpunk in a nutshell. It all sucks. Yeah. Yeah, I caught that too, Loner. Because Lucy was cognizant enough to recognize what was going on there. They all thought... It makes sense that they would come down so hard on him, since they probably thought he was stealing from Gloria. And they liked Gloria. And no, he's actually their son. You notice their entire attitude chills immediately. They're not willing to, like, embrace him with hugs and cuddles. But the moment they find out he's Gloria's son, it's like, oh. Okay. And yeah, she's dead, and they obviously are not particularly fond of that fact either. So, okay, sure. We're going to let you in on a gig. We'll give you a try. We'll give you a tryout. We'll see how this works. We'll see how this goes. So we have our prologue, our tutorial mission. It's actually a really, really basic mission. There's a guy. You got to pull his chip. And then you got to scan a copy of it to get the nav data. Then you got to put the chip back without anybody noticing it. That's actually a pretty basic mission, which ironically they completely flub, although not through any fault of their own. Sure. So they explain the plan. You know the rule. If you explain the plan goes wrong. They do something kind of interesting visually in that they explain the plan while it's happening. Now that may sound like a weird choice, but it exists because of the fact that I can tell you exactly what they're thinking, what they're trying to put together is, okay, we want to describe the plan, but we want something to happen while we're describing it. So there's a lot of things you could do, and there's like montage-y stuff, and there's background stuff, and there's visual storytelling. And they decided to just show the plan, so it kind of skips through most of that very, very, very quickly. This is such a low-level gig, it makes sense. You don't want to spend too much time on this. I have to jump in really quick. You know when the camera's out here and there's they pull into this warehouse area and that's where they're actually discussing the plan? I recognize that warehouse. In fact, it's in the highlight reel for my Cyberpunk 2077 run because that's where I grabbed that truck and I was trying to hijack that truck and I couldn't get it out the gate. Do any of you remember that? I'm actually curious because I do. That was a good highlight reel. Mr. Red did that one, I'm almost positive. And that was a good highlight reel. Long one, but there was a lot to cover in that game. Anyways, just thought I'd comment on that. So, nice car. Nice car. Rebecca gets showed up. And she's interesting. My first thought was she was actually a full bot. Like a total body conversion. But she's either very custom or she's actually got a lot of chrome. And I'm not sure which it is. They haven't shown much of her. In fact, she only shows up twice. But I am curious what direction they're going to take her as a character. So we'll just skip over that for now. They keep mentioning ICE. I wanted to talk about that very, very briefly. It stands for Intrusion Countermeasures in Electronics. It's more or less exactly what it sounds like. Cybersecurity. How good it is varies very, very wildly. Some of it is functionally impassable, like the Blackwall. Some of it's fine. Some of it does its own thing. It's a general term. It's not actually a term that's specific to Cyberpunk. It comes from Tom Maddox, who is one of those debatably originators of the genre. You know what I mean by that, right? Like, who invented sci-fi? Well, you're going to get like 3 or 4 answers to that question. So Tom Maddox is one of those debatably originators of the very concept of cyberpunk. But most of you have probably heard the term in Neuromancer, which is it's an old book. It's a good book, but that's the one that popularized it. Neuromancer is by William Gibson, if you're ever familiar with that. Anyways, so I've noticed anime likes to do this kind of thing in general. It's when the whole scene like pauses for a few seconds, and then like something that should be simple takes too long to happen. It's padding. It's literal padding, but it's like micro padding. It's the weirdest thing. And this is something I see in anime in general. And there's this section here where it's like, start the car, and he's just like, no, just start the car. Start the car. And I'm just sitting here like, why isn't he starting the car? Yeah, I know he's 17 and doesn't know how to drive. First of all, they have an autopilot. They even name dropped that. But second of all, like, can we go? Now, what's funny is it's not the concept itself that bothers me, because immediately after this is a scene where they're at the checkpoint and he has a PTSD moment where he thinks about the death of his mother. And it's the same type of scene. It's the same type of thing where they stretch things out. But in this case, it works for me. Yeah, the execution works a lot better here. First of all, it makes a lot more sense for him as a character. Second of all, it serves as like an actual jumpstart. It's there so that the trauma hits him. And we also hear a little character point. The whole time, Lucy has been like lightly making fun of him as they're desperately fleeing for their lives. The first time anything tilts into her voice indicating that she's actually worried is when they're sitting there for too long as the guys are on approach. Yeah, stuff like that, right? So you get it. Execution. That's what it always comes down to. I love how he keeps using the damned hardware, even though he knows that's a terrible, terrible idea. I have this really weird feeling that he just doesn't give a damn about the consequences, which is very punk, I will say. He is literally a one-trick pony, and that makes sense. When you're a low-level nobody who has one bit of really, really good gear, you're probably going to lean on that gear quite a bit. And yeah, he's also a 17-year-old kid, so that probably doesn't help anything either. So, we have a brief fight scene with the tiger guy. I do kind of like that they just straight up speak Japanese and everyone can just understand them. That's a really minor tidbit, but it is, once again, the all-important world building. I keep saying this. One of the things this whole show has been doing, I know we're only on episode 3, but all 3 episodes, the thing that I have no complaints about is the world building. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This show is doing a surprisingly good job of introducing the concepts of Night City and introducing people who've never been familiar with Night City or Cyberpunk or even the Cyberpunk genre to this concept and pulling people into it. And I'm just kind of with it. So we see, the dialogue, the language, how they continue to fight them, how certain tracking works, how some of the tech works, the magic cloud, I guess is the word. The magic wireless hacking, which is a thing in Cyberpunk. And it is functionally magic. Let's just call it what it is. We also need to emphasize, there's this bit where she pulls out the monowire. Now, she pulled it out earlier on David, but didn't actually use it on him. Here we see why that monowire was such a threat when she had it wrapped around his neck, because it slices the guy's arm into frickin' just cheese, right? Just... And, yeah, no, the dialogue and the characters haven't worked for me at all so far, Loner. It's pretty much the world building is the big thing that works for me. It's very strange. Yeah, I noticed that the hacking minigame was straight out of 2077, by the way. I caught that. We also have a bit where Maine shows up, and we also get a showcasing of what military-grade hardware really looks like. See, there was a tidbit earlier. It was a nice tidbit. One of the first rules you learn in Cyberpunk, this is true, is that your size isn't as indicative as it normally is, right? There's a bit of visual shorthand a lot of games use, including D&D, that the bigger the monster, the harder it is. That's very, very true in a lot of things. It's why size category is a thing, in addition to the obvious positioning on the squares. So, Cyberpunk tends to subvert that. We actually saw that in this episode, where there's this giant bruiser woman who's just beating the crap out of everyone, and then the person who actually beats her and kills her is this scrawny little thing, which goes ahead and goes chung, 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 shink, right into the skull, and actually kills her right there, right? Little stuff like that, right? Cyberpunk, ironically, subverts it by being more intelligent about how it approaches, but even Cyberpunk has the size rule in certain ways, because size means one big thing. You can fit more hardware in there. And we see Maine has got an entire goddamned cannon in his arm, and he uses it and literally pulps the bad guy. The tiger. Not too shabby. And again, all of this is establishment. These first 3 episodes, all they're doing is, this is Cyberpunk. I also like... Yeah, he's also got the gorilla fist. Sorry, I meant to mention that last episode. I forgot about that. The projectile launch system. Shakong! Yeah, Maine is very chromed. He's very, very, very chromed. Yes, it did, Loner. At least in the version I played. I know they've had a couple of editions since then. How much of Maine do I think is organic? You know, there's probably a couple pieces. So this then cuts to what's actually probably my favorite scene in all 3 episodes so far. Yeah, let's switch to it. All my tech songs are just a little bit too loud. Smasher, we don't want to talk about Smasher. And yeah, we also haven't seen Full Borg yet, nor should we. Full Borgs are rare for a reason. So we cut to the party sequence. I like the party sequence before Faraday shows up, because it gets across something that I've actually talked about as recently as this week. It's your rep. Money's nice, but rep is what sells. We've talked about this in several times, and it's true in several settings. Arguably, it's true in real life. Even in real life, there's a thing where, like, certain companies, gaming companies, will keep it on brand and relevant. Certain gaming companies will make ensured increased sales going forward, even if they put out a bad product, because they've got the rep, right? I mean, this, to go into a very specific example, one of the reasons that Nintendo is still going as well as it is because during the GameCube era, when Iwata took over, he actually came up with this big concept of exactly what I just said. Try to make sure that we're always going to have repeat customers. Trying to make sure that if we stumble, it's okay. We're going to keep the people on board who stumbled so they can learn from them lessons and do better, and we can put out a better product later. And they almost invariably then do put out a better product later, and that smooths things over, and they get the repeat customers. And Nintendo is rolling in money. They have a gigantic bank and hardly any debt. And it's almost entirely because of the fact that they are operating on this policy. They trade in rep. Exactly, Dante Bronson. Yeah, no kidding, I see. So, Cyberpunk, yeah, Prime 4. Cyberpunk lives and breathes rep. It's in fact, there's entire stat blocks for how rep works and how it operates and how you can build it into gameplay when you're actually playing the game. The pen and paper game, obviously. We've talked about this when we were streaming Cyberpunk 2. You want a good Ripper Doc, and that Ripper Doc wants to not screw you over because he wants to keep his cred, because otherwise he's screwed. And yeah, street cred is a literal stat, and there's the cool stat as part of this as well, like I was mentioning earlier. So Maine, you know, he's a solo, of course, but he plays things very, very straight. He is absolutely willing to pay, despite the fact that the job went kind of badly. Also upfronts him several bits of immunosuppressants so that he can keep his cyberware. Also goes out of his way to give him a bit of advice, which is absolutely true. Obviously, there's the only trust yourself thing, X-Files, we're walking. But the bit of advice he really gives that works for me is always make sure to invest in a way that works, in a way it's not wasted if it improves you, if it increases your strength, and that's you and your team. And in saying that, he also gets across why he's willing to invest in David, because he's being really good to David because he expects David is going to be giving him a return on his investment. We'll see if he's right or not. Yeah, no kidding, Loner. You gotta have a good Ripper Doc, and you've gotta have a good fixer, which leads so immediately into the Faraday introduction. Faraday? I forget how they pronounce it. They pronounced it weird. So Hiko shows up, And he's played by Giancarlo Esposito, which immediately threw me, by the way. Faraday, that's how they say. See, sorry, I've always heard it actually said Faraday, as in the Faraday cage. Faraday shows up. I might start writing that differently in my notes to help pronounce that. Yeah, Guts shows up. Love the 3 eyes, by the way. Nice little touch. There's a lot of little touches in their cybernetic designs. That's all over the place, and I'm down with that. It's a good way to maintain the aesthetic of the setting. Again, world building. He shows up, and he comes down entirely too hard on them. Makes a play, gets tons of subs from Eternus. You know, he just comes on as if he's really, really hard. Why is that significant? Per the rules of fiction, if someone feels the need to come down hard, they probably are not nearly as hard as they think they are. In fact, I thought this guy was corpo because of the way he was acting, until he leaves and then Maine mentions, no, he's actually our fixer. Now, if you remember, we just mentioned this, having a really good fixer is invaluable, which this is not. And I can tell you that in one scene. This is not a good fixer. Now, he's not a terrible fixer. There's worse than this. Yeah, no kidding. Colgrim, by the way, hi, Colgrim. I'm reminded of, and I don't want to spoil too much of the game, but I'm reminded of the first fixer we interact with back in 2077. Does anyone remember his name? Dex, thank you, that's him. I'm reminded of Dex, who was not a good fixer. That's just, okay. What in the world? I think we'll place this poor thing. Better or worse than Dex? Well, I've only got one scene to go off of. But if you put a gun to my head, I'd probably go ahead and take Faraday over Dex. Just right here. Like if like I said, just immediate decision. I'm switching to that side. I've also been wondering why Maine sounded so familiar this whole time. I don't remember the actor's name, forgive me, but he actually played Jax in the recent Mortal Kombat games. And he played Rude in Final Fantasy VII-R, both 1 and 2. And so his name was just right there, because those are both relatively recent games to me. Anyways, Rebecca then comes over for her second scene, and once again, I find myself wondering, how much of that is chrome? How much of that is custom? Because in Cyberpunk, there's a lot of cosmetic stuff you can do that isn't actually functionally cyberware, right? Like, for example, if I get the hair, the custom hair thing, where I can actually control my hair and change its color at will, that doesn't even fully qualify enough to actually make me do a humanity roll, right? So maybe she's just got the skin thing, and maybe she's just got the eye thing, and yeah, exactly. A lot of low impact stuff. That's exactly what I'm thinking. I don't know. I'm actually curious because I have no idea, and we've only seen her for 2 scenes. I know, Bragwin. I would love, even back in the day, there was a music mod, which is funny because I think it predates the iPod. But there was a music mod, and you could have a little bit of a chip put right here with a little speaker, and you could just have music playing right there in your ear cavity. Guess what one of the first things I always got in all my characters was? Anyways. And that's it. Oh, actually, sorry, one last thing. The principal calls back one last time, and he's just like, "You can all kiss my ass." Goes for the, goes for the drink. And then cut to credits. So obviously there's some good stuff on display here. The action is not great, and the dialogue's actually bad. We're still in setup land, so I'm still kind of processing a little bit. But I have to admit, my opinion of the show is actually starting to dip a little bit as we're going into it. Just being completely honest about that. There's most of what I have to talk about leans more into talking about the setting or even the concepts than it does the show. Now that makes sense. As I've said before, the show is doing everything it needs to, which is establishing the setting. But that does mean there's not really a lot of meat on the bones of the show. You'll notice I haven't even talked about any of the characters yet because I have very little to talk about with regards to the characters so far. And yeah, there's a couple of things in the action sequence which make me raise an eyebrow, even by the confines of this setting. Like, how does him turning the wheel super duper fast make the car turn super duper fast? Like, there's still a mechanical thing going on there, right? Like, this is still a mechanical process. There's just a lot of question marks I have. Yeah, it's very anime physics. Whoosh. It's confetti. And I'm willing to buy it. I'm willing to go along with it. It's not like I'm against it. It's just, it's pulling me out of it. And that's really the problem. It reminds me of comic book logic. Well, I have this superpower and I'm in this vehicle, therefore this vehicle has this superpower. And I bet you can think of several examples of that right off the top of your head. Because that's happened in comic books. Yeah, Transformer shows up in Cyberpunk, and then immediately gets salvaged for his parts. Or kills a lot of people, one of the two. Actually, yeah, probably both. Kills a lot of people and then gets, you know, salvaged. And then he gets hacked, because Transformers probably don't have any ice at all, so they just walk right in. Just, ah! Ah! Lol, Braglin. I think I can still vibe a yellow. I admit we're still low yellow. But we are still, I think, in yellow. There is still enough establishment. There's still enough world building. There's still enough... This is what Cyberpunk is to justify that. I think I'm going to acquiesce to that point. Now, I'm going to chop off the local recording.